Hi, welcome back to the shed for episode 27 of the ES335 build, and this time we're going to be carrying on where we left off last week by continuing with the neck shaping. Okay, so time to press on with the neck again. In the last episode we routed the truss rod channel, put the access in for the adjustment, and we cut the very basic shape of the neck out. In this episode we're going to get this section of the back of the headstock cleaned up. We need to put the transition into the heel there, and then we need to get the wings onto the headstock and get that shaped up. But before I do any of that, I had a couple of questions in the comments last time about why I don't use a scarf joint on these necks. The simple answer is I just prefer to make one-piece necks. I understand that there is an inherent risk of breakage in that, but I think there are a couple of mitigating factors that will also help me protect against that. Firstly, the truss rod system I'm using takes away much less material from this area of the neck than, say, the truss rod system that a Gibson would have. So the adjustment nut for the truss rod is much thinner than on a Gibson guitar. So that means we have to take away less material in this vulnerable area, but also it's an Allen key adjustment, so it adjusts kind of internal of the diameter of that nut, whereas the Gibson model uses a wrench which adjusts on the outside of the nut, which means you have to take away even more material in this area for the wrench to go on. And that does leave those necks vulnerable to breakage. This neck would still be relatively vulnerable, but it won't be quite as bad. If you ever see some of the broken Gibson necks when they're being repaired, there's hardly any material at all that's holding that headstock on. There's a lot more material in this configuration. What I also did, and this feeds into kind of timber selection and the ability to read your timber as well. I did kind of get a little bit lucky in this instance, but if you looked at the original blank, you could see that the grain kind of dropped away in this area, and it kind of followed, not exactly, but it sort of followed the angle of the headstock, which means there's much longer long grain fibres running through this area than if the grain had gone straight on. Luckily for me, I could take advantage of that, and the wood would still plane well in this direction, which is my preferred choice when making necks, because it means I can plane the headstock down much better than coming at it this way. So that was a stroke of luck, but it's understanding how the timber kind of works and how you can take advantage of its kind of natural configuration that will kind of help you get these jobs done successfully. Right, so anyway, on to getting this cleaned up, and the first thing I want to do is to kind of clean up this back face of the headstock, and I'm going to do that on the oscillating bobbin sander. Okay, I haven't used this in a while. When I was pulling it out, I found my old ear defenders. So that's that mystery solved. Okay, so what I've done here is I've got my oscillating spindle sander and I've clamped a fence onto the bed. So if you've got one of these and you choose to do this, it's really important that you get the fence on the correct side of the spindle. This spindle turns in this direction, okay? So when I've got the fence on this side, it's pushing back against my workpiece. If I was to put my fence on this side, it would be pulling my workpiece into the fence. And trust me, I have got this wrong, and it will fire pieces of wood right across your workshop at incredible velocity, and it is very dangerous. So just make sure that your direction of travel is pushing the work back, not pulling it in. Okay, so I've set this fence up to take the bulk of the waste off, and then we'll adjust it to get to the final cut that we want. Okay, so that's the back of the headstock nicely sanded in now. So next up we need to measure, mark out and then cut and sand this heel transition in. Okay, so to set this out for this transition into the heel is fairly straightforward. I've got a dimension on the drawing of 376mm from the nut line to the start of the transition, and that's where we've cut this square edge here on the blank. We then need to measure back another 18mm from there, and that gives us the start point of the curve for the transition. And then I've taken my closest bobbin to that radius that I've got, but it's a little bit too big. If I use this one, it would cut into the neck area, and I don't want to do that, but I can use it to mark it out. So I'm going to take the sleeve off, and then I'm going to just line that up and just use that to mark the radius that I want. I'll get the thick of that cut out on the bandsaw, and then I'll use a slightly smaller bobbin on the sander just to sand that in to the dimension that I want. It is also worth bearing in mind that when we do the actual neck carve, this will curve in this dimension as well. So a lot of the material around the edges of this curve will also be removed in that direction, but this makes a really good starting point for that process. Okay, so that's that element roughed in. So the next thing we need to do is add some material onto the sides of the headstock, so we've got enough room to cut our headstock shape out. But before I do any kind of measuring or cutting or anything of the material that's going to go on here, I'm just going to take a very finely set block plane and just take a couple of little shavings off there, just to make sure I've got a nice clean gluing surface, and I'll also check that for square. Okay, so that's spot on. So now I'm going to take the big chunk of wood that we cut off in the first place, because even with that hole in, it's still easily big enough for what we need, and I'm going to run that through the bandsaw and cut about kind of 14mm slice off that, which I will then cut down into the pieces that I need to glue on. Okay, so this has been drying overnight, so I'm just going to get the clamps off. And we just need to clean up any excess there might be on both sides of this. So I tried to keep the bulk of the excess onto the top face because obviously that's a lot easier to plane down than the back. So on the couple of areas where it is a little bit proud, I'm just going to take a card scraper and just flush that up. So next up is just to mark out where I want the headstock to go, and we can get that trimmed down. So first up, I'm just going to make sure I've got my centre line re-established so I can see it. So that's the centre line put back in along the headstock, but the problem I've got is that my centre line where I need it at the end of here is actually been removed by the truss rod route. As you can see, that fits there, so there's no reference point there at all. So I've just measured the width of the nut, which is giving me 44mm. So I'm going to just set up a pair of dividers to 22. And I can just mark that on the nut line, and that will give me a way of referencing in that dimension as well. And visually that looks spot on. So I'm just going to quickly draw around that. And we've got another trip to the bandsaw. Right, well I definitely think I'm in the market for a new bandsaw blade, but we've got that cut out all right. So next, age-old routine, masking tape and super glue the template on and get the router out. And I'm just going to make this cut with my small trim router and a little 1/2 inch pattern bit. Okay, and get this template off and just see how we've done. And I think that's come out rather nicely. I'll still need to do a little bit of work in the centre there where my router bit's too big to go down and follow the template properly, but literally 2 minutes work with a couple of files and we'll be good there. Looks good on the back, happy with that. And I haven't gone all the way down on these bits yet. I'll just get those when I do the carve on the rest of the neck. But all in all, yeah, really happy with that. I think that's looking good. It is worth bearing in mind that this is going to have an ebony veneer on the top of it, so none of it will actually ever be seen, but that doesn't mean we're not going to do a decent job of it. Okay, so the next thing we might want to do on this neck is to tackle the carve and kind of shape the neck how we want it. But I don't want to do that just yet, because realistically to do that I have to attach the fretboard, and I can't attach the fretboard until I've cut the neck tenon. And because of the way I want to go about this, I can't cut the neck tenon until I've cut the neck pocket in the body. So the next step is going to be get the body back on the bench, create a template and get that neck pocket cut. But as you can imagine, that's a lot of work, and it's definitely more work than I want to tackle in this episode. So I'll leave that till next time. So as always, hit that like button if you've liked. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.